For almost half a century, when you hear the word Afghanistan, you probably think of one thing: war. But it wasn't always a war zone. So today, we're going to dig into how a country that was actually modernizing fell into this 40-year spiral of conflict, and what that legacy means for its people right now. Let's get into it. To really get the scale of this tragedy, you just have to look at this contrast. On one side, you have the Afghanistan of the 1960s, a stable monarchy, a place where women were going to university, and Kabul was this vibrant cultural hub. And on the other side, today, a nation staring down a total economic collapse, a massive humanitarian crisis, and a system where women are literally being erased from public life. And that, right there, is the big question, isn't it? How did that hopeful past curdle into this devastating present? What was the tipping point that pushed a nation off its path and into what seems like a never-ending cycle of violence? That's what we're here to unpack. All right, so to figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock. We need to look at the Afghanistan that existed before all of this, before the invasions and the warlords, to really understand the future that was lost. Believe it or not, for 40 years, a whole 4 decades under King Zahir Shah, Afghanistan was this island of stability. It was a constitutional monarchy, and it was pretty smart about navigating the Cold War, staying friends with both the US and the Soviet Union. And we're not talking about ancient history here. In cities like Kabul, women were working as professionals, education was expanding. You could feel a real sense of progress in the air. This is the future that got derailed. And then it happened. The one event that just lit the fuse on everything. A single decision that shattered that stability and plunged the country into a conflict that would eventually drag in the whole world. So picture this, it's Christmas Eve, 1979. Soviet tanks are rolling into Afghanistan. Now their goal was to prop up a communist government that was falling apart. The Kremlin figured, hey, this will be quick, in and out, secure a southern border. But boy, were they wrong. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. It was also the only time the Soviets sent their army outside the Eastern Bloc, and it turned a local problem into a global crisis. And just like that, this wasn't some local issue anymore. It became the final, bloody showdown of the Cold War. See, the US saw a golden opportunity to give the Soviets their own personal Vietnam. They launched something called Operation Cyclone, and through Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, they funneled billions of dollars in weapons to Islamic fighters called the Mujahideen. All of a sudden, Afghanistan was a proxy war, with superpowers arming opposite sides, caring a lot more about beating each other than about what happened to the Afghan people. Okay, and this is where that vicious cycle really kicks into gear. Because when that war ended, it didn't bring peace. It just left this huge power vacuum. And well, we all know what rushes into a vacuum: more violence. It set the stage for the next war and the next. So let's just walk through this chain of events, because it's really something. It all starts in 1989. The Soviets pull out, defeated, leaving a massive power vacuum. Then by 1992, the same Mujahideen groups that fought the Soviets turn on each other. With no common enemy, they splinter and start a horrific civil war that completely destroys Kabul. Out of that chaos, in 1996, a new group emerges, the Taliban. They promise to bring order, but through brutal repression. And here's the final link that pulls the West in. The Taliban gives safe haven to al-Qaeda, which leads directly to 9/11 and the 20-year American-led war. You see the pattern, right? One disaster just directly leads to the next. So after 40 years of this, what's the real cost? The numbers, they're hard to even wrap your head around. But they tell an absolutely devastating story. Okay, let's just take the most recent chunk of this war, the 20 years from 2001 to 2021. Over 212,000 people were killed. And listen to this, more than 46,000 of them were civilians. Men, women, children, just caught in the middle. And remember, that number, that huge number, doesn't even count the people who died in the Soviet War or the Civil War. And the money, my gosh, the money is just as mind-blowing. The US alone spent over $2.3 trillion. That's with a T. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire economy of a country like Canada. It's a sum so massive, it just begs the question, where did it all actually go? And of course, the cost isn't just measured in lives lost on the battlefield. Right now, as we speak, 6.4 million Afghans are refugees, scattered all over the world. That's one of the largest and longest-suffering refugee populations on the entire planet, all forced from their homes by decades of nonstop violence. So remember that question, Where did all that money go? Well, this slide pretty much lays it out. Every war has winners and losers. On one side, you've got the winners. Big U.S. defense contractors who got huge pieces of that $2.3 trillion. Pakistan's military establishment, opium traffickers, and local warlords. And on the other side, the victims. Ordinary Afghan civilians, the country's own soldiers and police, and most especially, its women and girls. Okay, so that brings us right up to today. Because when U.S. and NATO forces pulled out in 2021, the crisis didn't stop. Nope. It just entered a new and honestly, a more desperate chapter. If you want to understand why the country collapsed so fast, just look at this chart. That huge purple chunk, that's foreign aid. It paid for 75%, 3/4 of all public spending. This wasn't really a self-sustaining state. It was more like a project built on foreign cash. So what happens when you pull the plug? The whole thing didn't just crack. It just evaporated overnight. And the fallout from that, absolutely catastrophic. We're seeing hunger just skyrocket. By 2025, we're looking at over 17 million people facing severe hunger. And this is the really scary part. This is the first increase in food insecurity in 4 years. The situation is actually getting worse, not better. And running parallel to this economic collapse is a human rights catastrophe, especially for women. It's gotten so bad that the UN and others now have a name for it: gender apartheid. And they don't use that term lightly. It means this isn't just random discrimination. It's a deliberate, systematic plan to erase half the population from society. And Afghanistan is the only country in the world with these policies. And this isn't some abstract concept. Look at the actual rules they've put in place. Girls, banned from education after 6th grade. No high school, no university. Women, barred from most jobs, including for aid groups and the UN. They can't go to parks, gyms, or public baths. They can't even travel without a male guardian. The Taliban have even declared that a woman's voice is aurat, an intimate part of the body that has to be covered up. It's a total siege on their existence. So, after all of this, is there any way out? Is there any hope at all for stability? Or is Afghanistan just stuck in this cycle forever? So, what does a path to recovery even look like? Well, experts pretty much agree it's a 4-piece puzzle, and you can't solve it without all 4 pieces. First, and this is the big one, restoring women's rights. It's non-negotiable, not just because it's right, but because no society can function without half its population. Then you need inclusive government, a way for the country to get back into the global economy, and just massive, sustained humanitarian aid to stop people from starving. None of these can work on their own. And all of this leaves us with one last, very tough question. After 40 years of invasions, after all the proxy wars and interventions that poured fuel on this fire, what is the world's responsibility? The responsibility of the nations that armed the fighters, that funded the governments, and then just left? What is their responsibility to the ordinary Afghan people left behind to face the consequences?